In the age of universal deceit, telling the truth will be a revolutionary act. The first chapter of Jacques Zillal's Propaganda, the characteristics of propaganda. True modern propaganda can only function within the context of the modern scientific system. But what is it? Many observers look upon propaganda as a collection of gimmicks and of more or less serious practices. And psychologists and sociologists very often reject the scientific character of these practices. For our part, I just want to remind you that this book was written in 1965. For our part, we completely agree that propaganda is a technique rather than a science, but it is a modern technique. That is, it is based on one or more branches of science. Propaganda is the expression of these branches of science. It moves with them, shares in their successes, and bears witness to their failures. He's going on about the definition of propaganda. And when he talked about the gimmicks and serious practices, most French psychologists and psychosociologists do not regard propaganda as a serious practice or as having much influence. So that was the corollary to that, or that footnote to that a little far-fetched, I felt, statements. In this connection, Albig is right to stress that propaganda cannot be a science because in the field in which it applies, there can be neither valid generalizations nor constant factors. So this was when he was talking about propaganda being a technique or a science. So it cannot be a science because the field in which it applies, there can be neither valid generalizations nor constant factors. So based on the definition of science itself, he refutes the claim. Or based on the scientific method. The time is past when propaganda was a matter of individual inspiration, personal subtlety, or the use of unsophisticated tricks. So, individual inspiration, personal subtlety, and unsophisticated tricks don't work in the modern age, so he's saying. Now science has entered propaganda, as we shall reveal from 4 different points of view. Alright, first of all, modern propaganda is based on scientific analysis of psychology and sociology. Second, propaganda is based on the scientific analyses of psychology and sociology. So now it's kind of circular. Science defines modern propaganda. Or, yeah, that's true. Second, propaganda is scientific in that it tends to establish a set of rules, rigorous, precise, and tested, that are not merely recipes, but impose themselves on every propagandist who is less and less free to follow his own impulses. So it's scientific because it's a set of rules which are rigorous and precise, and also tested. Third, what is needed nowadays is an exact analysis of both the environment and the individual to be subjected to propaganda. So nature versus nurture. No longer does the man of talent determine the method, the approach, or the subject. Wow. No longer does this like music business. The man of talent does not determine the method, the approach, or the subject. All that is now being calculated. Okay, according to the scientific works. And finally, therefore, one type of propaganda will be found suitable in one situation and completely useless in another. To undertake an active propaganda operation, it is necessary to make a scientific, sociological, and psychological analysis first, and then utilize those branches of science which are becoming increasingly well known. But here again, proper training is necessary. Finally, one last trait reveals the scientific character of modern propaganda: the increasing attempt to control its use, measure its results, define its effects. So some people object to this, obviously. Anything, there's a reaction. But speaking of chemistry, I think I've given you a good introduction of the introductory chapter of the book Propaganda by Jacques Law.